Well, the liturgical season of Lent started on March 1st, and you may have noticed that Unity doesn't closely follow the Christian liturgical calendar because we're just a bit too rebellious, heretical, and free-spirited for that. But that doesn't mean that we totally ignore it either. Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore had some very interesting ideas about Lent. In fact, he wrote an entire book on the subject of Lent called Keep a True Lent. And back in the 1800s, when Unity was just getting going, the Fillmores were really trying to offer a new vision of Christianity, and I think maybe their ultimate goal was to transcend it altogether. But in order to do that, they had to redefine and reframe some of those key ideas that we get from traditional Christianity, including Lent. Gradual and gentle change seems to work best. Nobody likes having the rug pulled out from under them, and the Fillmores knew that. One of the more interesting passages in Keep a True Lent wasn't written by Charles Fillmore at all. It comes from the foreword to the book, and that was written by Georgiana Tree West, who was the minister at Unity Center in New York during the 1930s. And in just a few short sentences, she captures, I think, the essence of the entire book. Here's what she says. She says, "Too many people make a fad out of Lent. It is fashionable to give up some luxuries, and when those luxuries have to do with food and drink, it is profitable physically. There is also psychological value in the mental discipline involved, but such observance has nothing to do with being a Christian. Atheists could get the same benefit. We must learn to fast from all unworthy thought and feast on the good and the true," and I would add the beautiful. "To observe Lent according to the Spirit rather than the letter, we must fast from criticism and condemnation and feast in brotherly love," and so on. You get the idea, the Spirit rather than the letter. Like the song said at the beginning today, our Lent practice is to eliminate the negative and accentuate the positive. That's what we do. And it can really help to have some key ideas to guide us along the way, a Lenten practice, so to speak, a framework. And so this year, we're working with some of the ideas that are found in a book called The Obstacle is the Way, the timeless art of turning trials into triumph. It was written by Ryan Holiday, and that's based on ancient Greek and Roman Stoic philosophy, specifically the work of Marcus Aurelius, who wrote this wonderful thing that's called the Meditations. It was something that he wrote for himself, going through difficult and challenging times, and eventually it was found by his successors and was published and has come down to us and is considered to be a valuable inspiration to a lot of people in the world still today. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor. He was a military leader and a philosopher who faced numerous obstacles and challenges, which he overcame using the principles of Stoic philosophy as he had learned them back then. So here's how Ryan Holiday, the author of the book, describes the problem that we face. This thing in front of you, this issue, this obstacle, this frustrating, unfortunate, problematic, unexpected problem preventing you from doing what you want to do. That thing you dread or secretly hope will never happen. What if it wasn't so bad? What if embedded inside it or inherent in it were certain benefits? Benefits only for you. What would you do? What do you think most people would do? Probably what they've always done and what you are doing right now. Nothing. Let's be honest. Most of us are paralyzed. Whatever our individual goals, most of us sit frozen before the many obstacles that lie ahead of us. Anyone know what that's like? The feeling of paralysis, being frozen before an obstacle or a challenge. We're either frozen into inaction, or the action that we take is to try to avoid the obstacle, or complain about it, or blame others for what's happening. It's part of the human condition. It's part of the human condition. So it is from the writings of Marcus Aurelius that we get a 3-step process that can help us to get unstuck in these kind of situations. And here's what he tells us. Objective judgment, now at this very moment. Unselfish action, now at this very moment. Willing acceptance, now at this very moment of all external events. That's all you need. And another way of saying this, breaking it down into 3 short words, is perception, action, and will. Today we start with step 1, perception. But first, I think we might need to clear up what I think is a common misunderstanding of what Stoicism is all about. In our culture, you mention the word Stoic, and a lot of people immediately think of this guy. Right? Mr. Spock from Star Trek, the Vulcan science officer on the Enterprise in Star Trek, the original series. One of the major storylines that crosses over into all of the different Star Trek TV shows and movies is this idea that Vulcans are supposed to be without feelings, without emotions. The highest attainment for a Vulcan is something they call kolinar, which is a ritual in which the last vestiges of emotion and feeling are purged from their consciousness. And it makes for a very interesting and productive storyline, but at the end of the day, it's still fiction. And yet Star Trek nerds nationwide will engage in spirited debates over whether Vulcans really do eliminate emotions, or if they just suppress them and stuff them and so on and so forth. In the real world, suppressing feelings and emotions is very unhealthy. And the Stoics knew that. They didn't believe in denying or suppressing the emotions. They wanted to master them and not be driven by them. And that's a very different thing. Stoic philosophy has no problem with showing emotions. But as long as they don't interfere and run the show. Just like one of the other songs we did here a little bit earlier. It's okay to feel the fear. It's okay to feel the fear, provided we can still act. Feel the fear, do it anyway. Or sometimes that fear is there for a good reason. We feel the fear, we pause for a moment, and we realize that maybe this isn't such a good idea after all, right? You know what they say about bad ideas? Bad ideas. Many of them start with the phrase, "Hold my beer and watch this." As the guy holds up a fish in front of an alligator, and of course, yeah, there's this other one here. Probably began with "Hold my beer," right? Liquid courage leads to a lot of trauma. So the fear is often there for a good reason. We don't want to eliminate the fear. We want to feel it. We want to experience it. We want to be able to say, aha, I get the message. I'll do this or I won't do that. We want to master it. Know when to listen and when to proceed anyway. And that takes self-awareness and discipline, and it starts with perception, which is our topic today. So here's the definition of perception that we're going to work with. What is perception? It's how we see and understand what occurs around us and what we decide those events will mean. Our perceptions can be a source of strength or of great weakness. Again, we decide. We choose. And it takes us right back to this thing in unity that we have called personal responsibility. We may not have caused the challenge or brought about the obstacle that we're facing, but what we do with it is entirely up to us. So here's a few choices we can make when it comes to how we perceive a situation that looks like to us an obstacle. We can choose to be objective, to control emotions and keep an even keel. to look for the good in a situation, to place things in perspective, to revert to the present moment, to focus on what can be controlled. Now, those aren't just empty platitudes. Something that the author does very well in this book is to give us real-life examples of people who made choices like this to deal with their own obstacles and choices about how to deal with their perception. And one of the examples he starts with on perception is a man named Reuben Hurricane Carter. Remember him? He was a champion boxer who was convicted and imprisoned for a triple murder that he had nothing to do with. You might remember Bob Dylan wrote a song about him, wrote the song of his unjust imprisonment, the story of his life. And it took 19 years for Reuben Hurricane Carter, 19 years and 2 more trials to overturn the conviction, but justice prevailed. And when he got out, Reuben Carter simply returned to his life. He didn't sue for damages. He didn't even demand an apology, because that would be an admission by him that something had been taken from him. And he refused to do that. Nelson Mandela did something similar when he was released from prison. He was unjustly imprisoned for 27 years. And as he left prison that day, here's what he said. He said, "As I walked out the door and toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison." Perception. Perception. They didn't have much power in prison, but they refused to perceive themselves as powerless. They could throw them in jail, deprive them of their possessions, but they could never control their thoughts, beliefs, or reactions. When Reuben Carter was in prison, he refused to be touched. He refused to break. He refused to grovel. He refused to despair. He would not wear a uniform. He would not eat prison food. He would not accept visitors. He would not attend parole hearings or work in the commissary to reduce his sentence. He spent all of his time and energy doing the one thing that he could do, which was to work on his legal case, to ultimately earn his freedom. He refused to be a prisoner. Perception. He looked for the good. And what he saw was that he had practically unlimited time to read and to learn. And I suppose if he were into meditation, he would have seen that as an opportunity as well. Plenty of time to practice, plenty of time to revert to the present moment, and maybe he did in his own way. He recognized that he had the kind of power that can never be taken away, and that is a really big part of our message in Unity. Here's a reminder from Discover the Power Within You by Eric Butterworth. He says, "Things may happen around you, things may happen to you, but the only things that really count are the things that happen in you. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control what we think about what happens, and what we are thinking is our life at any particular moment." Another critical aspect of perception is being able to control or being able to distinguish, to know the difference between what we can and cannot control. Sports world is filled with stories of highly talented athletes who sustain injuries that they had no control over. And then they choose to do everything in their power to heal, to recover, to rehabilitate, and get back to the field. And there was a very well-known major league pitcher named Tommy John. He was very successful until he blew out a ligament in his arm. It was a career-ending injury at that time. I believe it was back in the mid-70s. It was career-ending. There was no way to repair it. And he had had a brilliant career. He had played for 11 seasons, and he could have easily retired. At 11 seasons, yeah, he could have easily retired. But instead, he elected to be the first person to undergo experimental surgery. He found a doctor who had some ideas, and that decision was within his control. Didn't control what had happened to him, but he could control that. So he went through the surgery, he went through a rigorous rehab program, and then he went on to play 13 more seasons. Won another 164 games. So he puts all of his energy into the things that he could control. And he's still not in the Hall of Fame. Right? Go figure, right? Still not in the Hall of Fame. It's surprising, but they did name the surgery after him, and you still hear today pitchers and other people with arm injuries who undergo Tommy John surgery. That's what they call it now. And it's saved the careers of lots of pitchers since then. So the final point for today is something that we've been touching on, but we've not talked about directly. This idea that there is an opportunity within every obstacle or challenge, that the obstacle itself is the way. How do we spot it? How do we spot the opportunity that's embedded in any challenge or obstacle? Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to start by affirming that it's there, even if we can't see it yet. Title of the book, The Obstacle is the Way is there someplace, I'm going to find it. That's all we have to do for starters. And a good example of how that works isn't in the book. Happened right here. Back in 2008, we had this thing called the Great Recession. And as businesses were going under, we lost a couple of our tenants upstairs. And one of them we were having difficulty replacing because they were in the space right out there on High Street, and it was a lot of space. And Auburn was glutted with office space back in 2008, 2009, 2010, and so on and so on. Auburn was flooded with rental spaces. Businesses were folding left and right. We could have gone cut rate. We could have gone cut rate just to get that space filled, but that probably would have created some problems with our existing tenants. You know how that goes. It has a snowball effect. So for the time being, we started using the room ourselves. We used it for additional classroom, meeting rooms. We had some folks from outside the congregation who were doing tutoring and classes like that. And it was a lot of empty space, but we used it. And just about the time we were getting to like having all that extra space up there, Karen and our administrative assistant Margie back then started thinking about the idea of a thrift store. The obstacle was finding a paying tenant. The opportunity was finding a way to use the space ourselves instead of relying on someone else to come in. Using the space ourselves to generate income, and the rest, as they say, is history, because our regular monthly income from that thrift store is close to twice as much as we could get from renting it at market value. That's the way these things work out. So, you know, the opportunity is right there in the obstacle as long as you stick with it, and we did, and we learned how to use it for ourselves, and that's made a big difference. Now, of course, once you work on your perception and affirm that the obstacle is the way, that there is opportunity within the obstacle, there are additional steps that have to happen. And one of the most important steps, once we've accurately spotted the opportunity and dealt with our perception, is action, which is where we'll pick up again next week. See you then. Thank you.